and begin to exist in their bodies and work through their bodies. How? Give one stimulation to their mind towards their own Lord. The seed begins to germinate. It may take a few years, but the Lord is already there as a little chicken out of the egg. Once again came down to earth in flesh. So, you work through him. The same Lord works through all these bodies. You can be in Belgium, and the fellow you created may be in Africa. You have no need or craze to go to Africa to work with him. And he has no glamour to live with you physically, because life is one and bodies are many. So always he is near you and you are near him. He works as you work. He thinks as you think. And also he decides as you decide. Leave things to his decision, not to others. For 1,000 people, you may be kind and good, but don't leave your decisions to any one of them. But to the one who has come to you for the higher thing, he needs nothing from you except to work with you, offer you his body, so that you work through his mind, through his senses, and through his limbs. Like this, you can create hundreds of bodies and make a simultaneous existence of yourself. This is what is called the higher use of yoga practice. Work for humanity is prescribed like this. And long before Patanjali existed, there was the one initiator of yoga who gave us the idea how to make a group of bodies, each working anywhere in this world, but working only as one group. That is what Master Jwalkul calls the group work. He may be in the Himalayas, Alice A. Bailey may be in New York, but she worked for him for 30 years. He worked through her body for 30 years. You need not make even a transmutation of those people. That is, you need not demand that they should come out of their defects. If you go through the autobiography of Alice A. Bailey, she was having many defects and a sickly body, and she worked for him and he worked through her body, and she died with her defects, but he worked through her body. Had she submitted her body also to him, he would have made a transmutation of her. That is between them. We have nothing to comment. The first initiator of humanity into that art of working through many bodies is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita by Lord Krishna. The first initiator made people into groups, each group working for humanity, each group having its own syllabus and its own way of working. He prescribed a male and a female body for two people, and they asked them to live as man and wife, because that is the most convenient social relationship that a society have no objections for. So instead of fighting the society to live with another person, instead of suffering with occasional difficulties, financial and economic difficulties and climatic difficulties, instead of a person from hot country trying to live in a cold country for his master, or a person from cold country to live in hot country for his master. Even then, if the master has a male body and the disciple has a female body, or vice versa, that is, if the disciple has a male body and the master a female body, there will be social troubles. So, he prescribed that if they live as man and wife, if a full-fledged yogi of Patanjali yoga gets himself married with a disciple, or a yogi in a female body gets married with a disciple in a male body, they begin to make a group work, and the factor of sex automatically becomes normal, because it is in no way antisocial. The relationship is as lawful as it is legal, and therefore he made the life of a yogi compulsory to get married. Unless an adept in yoga practice gets married, he is not fit for group work. That is what he prescribed. That first initiator is called the Manu of our race. The present Manu is the seventh Manu. He is called the Swayambhu Vaivasvata Manu. A Manu, you must be knowing, is the consciousness ruling over a big span of evolution called Manvantara. Each group of humanity is trained by its Manu. The Manu of our present humanity prescribed a yogi to get married, either another yogi, or to transmute, to make a transmutation of a non-yogi as his wife, so that she may be a yogi within no time. Both of them not only performing the animal work of reproduction and the beastly work of sex instinct, but also the work of creating humanity, that is, radiating yogic presence, so that they train their children also in the same way. And the group of the wife, husband, and children are considered one unit for group work. Like that, if we form into groups, each group having a unit group work, and there will be intermarriages from one group to another, so that no marriage from the same group is arranged, is organized, and health is maintained. That's why the Manu gave us the names of genealogy, and every one of us is expected to recollect the names of our ancestors every day in the morning before meditation, so that no couple can be married with the same ancestors, having the same ancestors. So, some of the families who still observe the injunctions of Manu, we have what we call the names of our ancestors. Every day we think of the names of the ancestors, and we initiate them into our children, and this goes on through thousands and thousands of years. But still we are protecting from marrying from the same blood. That is what Krishna quotes in Bhagavad Gita. That is group work. Creating persons in other bodies as yogis and giving them yoga stimulation, making them lords of themselves, living in Lord consciousness, and working for you in the same direction, and offering their bodies and minds. You remember how Lord Jesus offered his body and mind to Lord Christ, who spoke through Lord Jesus. That is one of the higher purposes of yoga practice. So, the family unit is considered very, very sacred in the yoga path. Family is not a formality, and marriage is not a social convenience according to the yoga path. Marriage is described as a sacrament which is the path to magnetize. One yogi working as a magnet, his marriage partner, though born as an iron piece, is made a magnet through yoga process. This is one of the higher purposes of yoga according to Patanjali. And the next stage and the last stage that Patanjali describes is, he says, there is nothing impossible for you to do in this world. If money is needed by you, it comes to you. Don't ask anyone. If opportunities are needed, they are needed by others, not for you, because you do not want anything. Therefore, they come to you. If strength is needed for you to do some work, your body begins to feel stronger. Your health becomes better, at least for the time being, and you will be able to work at the rate of 12 hours or 20 hours a day. If you go through the story of how Madame Blavatsky wrote The Secret Doctrine, you will understand the same thing. She had white papers and pen and no other things. She had no advanced facilities as we have now. No photostats and no copies, no carbon papers even. And every page of the Secret Doctrine, it is written in her own handwriting with her own pen. You know, in print and small print, the book exists in more than 2000 pages. And the previous work given through her by the masters, named Isis Unveiled, it also consists of more than 2000 pages. All these 5000 pages she has written in her own handwriting. And she had no scribes. She could not dictate to anyone. And there was one attendant with him, Colonel Alcott. And he used to gather all the papers she wrote every day and make a press copy of all those copies. And in every page she used to quote from at least 5 or 6 books and give the reference number of the page of the book from which she quoted. Whereas she was not having those books with her. And he had to compare all these quotations from the original books every day. And the references made by her in one day script, he required at least 1 week to refer and verify the truth of it. That was how she was writing. She had nothing but paper and pen and ink. And she had no money even to eat sometimes. She was taking some tea and writing. And previously her body was ailing, that is ill. And when she began to write that book, the illness was suspended and she could write at the rate of 19 hours a day continuously. And after about 3 years, she was once again ill and she went into a coma-like condition. And then she was called from her physical body, and her master Jwalkul asked her, "Do you want some rest? Are you too much fatigued? Your body has become old and ill, and if you want some rest, you can die now, so that we can complete the work after some time." Then she said, "I will complete the work. Let me live in the same body and do it complete." He asked her, "Can you endure the suffering?" She said, "Gladly." And then he gave his acceptance. And mysteriously to the doctors, she recovered from her coma. And from the very next day, she once again began to write. She completed her writing. And then only she allowed herself to die. That is how the masters work through the bodies of their disciples. Sometimes, if a Krishnamacharya thinks that he is working for 12 hours a day too much, I am fatigued, I am working more than many people, because I have always at hand people who write for me when I dictate. It is not like Blavatsky that every fellow is working. And I have everything to eat. Many people give me good food. It is not like Blavatsky I am eating. She had to wait for the money of the published articles from the editors sometimes for 5 or 6 days before she ate. And with all the facilities I have, with all the printing facilities and the friends I have, and with all the photostat arrangements and mechanism I have at hand, if I think that I am working too much, I must be a fool when I compare the work of Blavatsky or some other disciples. So, this is one of the higher uses of yoga. And he says, the purpose of the vehicles is finished. When the person reaches the 8th stage of perfection in yoga, called the simultaneous existence, and when the person begins to live in the Lord every moment, then the training is complete. The physical vehicles exist for our training, and the triangle of qualities exists only to give us the training in evolution. That is, the qualities of rajas or dynamism, tamas or inertia, and sattva or poise. These are the 3 qualities that are governing our mind, and each has one of these 2 things dominant. Some people live with rajas as dominating principle. They suffer from hyperactivity. They talk too much. They walk too much. They remark too much. See, they have strong likes and dislikes, and they have very strong liking and hatred, very strong impressions. And those who have tamas as the leading principle of their psychology, they are hyposensitive.
Enregistré, non?
Je l'enlève, tu
C'est pas... Et on peut enregistrer dessus ou quoi?
Sitting at a place and rarely even standing. And they like tastes of food and drink, and they allow their lives dominated with these tastes. And they like the element of sex to dominate their life. They have certain things that lead their life, and they are generally late in understanding, too methodical to change themselves from bad to good condition. In course of evolution, both these people reap the consequences of their behavior. For example, the fellow who talks too much and too loudly, he is called a chatterbox and an idiot. And like that, everyone reaping his own vocational and financial consequences, they begin to rectify themselves on the plane of reactions, fighting out their life from birth to death. And gradually they come to the third stage called poise. Both of these temperaments, they gradually taper to a point which is called the balanced way of feeling things, balanced way of looking at things, balanced way of sleeping, speaking, learning and thinking. Then from that point onwards, they are drawn to the yogic path some day or other. And then when once they fall into the proper line, their psychological mechanism will be diverted into themselves, and the light of the Lord within is kindled into the psychological mechanism, and life undergoes transmutation. Then the purpose of the three qualities is finished. They cease to exist to the yogi because the purpose is finished. And the purpose of the physical and mental vehicles is also finished, and he can leave them forever to join as one in the Deva kingdom, to work for the evolution of others. But many times the yogi prefers to take another body. Like that, live thousands and thousands of years in human physical bodies, because he wants to work as a transmitter of the same light. Those are called the elder brothers of mankind, or the masters. Those who have rejected what we call liberation. Unless a sacrifice of the idea of liberation is made, no one can be a true disciple of the master. Because what the philosophers call liberation is only self-deception. It is selfishness ennobled. Yes, ennobled. An advantage for oneself. One who wants to get liberated is a selfish fellow. So he can never be among the disciples of the masters. This process of sacrificing the idea of liberation is inaugurated by Lord Buddha in the present mankind, and we are expected to follow their path. And finally, there are two alternatives for a perfected and transmuted yogi. He can take any one of the alternatives. The one is to lead the world into good things, to be an instructor of mankind, or to achieve something great for humanity. If he takes that path, he is allowed to be his own judge. He has to check out his own program and make a group work through created bodies, working in many bodies simultaneously. And for the consequences of his work through centuries, he is responsible. For any mistake he does, he is responsible, and he is penalized by nature. And the other path is to believe that nature knows better. It knows how to make a better use of us. It knows where to place us. I need not crave in my mind to go to Liège to spread wisdom, because nature knows better where I should do my work. These are those who are called those who killed glamour. Then they receive another presentation by nature, which Patanjali describes the overclouding. They are overclouded, or they are covered by what? By the law of creation, and it works through them. They stop working. That is what happens. Whatever they speak becomes the law, because they never speak against the law. Whatever they do will be the ideal of others, because they never do anything against progressive element. But they offer forever their judgment. They have nothing to judge. They allow things to take place through them. Except refusing liberation, they don't choose anything. The rest nature takes into its hands, and they begin to work with the humanity according to the plan of nature, not according to their plan. So they have no mistakes in their work, because nature has no mistake. And they have no casualties or injuries done by them to others in the spiritual path. And so goes, their existence is only the existence of nature's law. So that is the ultimate goal of yoga practice. That is the ultimate goal of spiritual science. That is the highest ideal given in every scripture. But everyone has to choose in the end which of the alternatives he wants. This is about the yoga path and the symbolism of the yogic terms and their practical application in the daily life. Yeah. I thank you all once again, and I thank our hostess of the evening also. Cooperation. By world goodwill, do you mean the organization of the present one organization of the world goodwill working? Yes, we have every duty to work along with such organization, and any one good organization like the World Goodwill Organization can be chosen as the field of our work, and whichever is the nearest to our way of doing the work will be our field of action. And when we do something for the mankind by way of service, automatically it forms part of the syllabus of such organization. We can get ourselves attached to any one of such organizations, but it is always more useful to get attached to any one such organization than doing individually. Personally, I believe that languages take a natural course of evolution, and nature knows better in deciding the time and the place of the evolution of a particular language. Because nature is working for every one of us until we understand that we are inseparable part of the total humanity, and that we can never dream of a separate existence without having serious consequences of it. So,